So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Avatar. So let's start the series. I'm going to kill you for this. Naruto hurried closer, his nails suddenly claws and his eyes crimson with slit pupils. The masked female leaped out as the mirror broke, attempting to insert a needle into Naruto's neck. He rolled aside as the impact kicked up dust. When the masked girl attempted to enter another mirror, Naruto struck him, sending him flying across the bridge. He wanted to stop it, so he charged his chakra into his hand, but before he could hit Haku, he was attacked from behind, which sent him forward on the ground. Naruto's chakra kept rising until the demon cloak had two tails. Haku said, "Took you long enough, Kamimuro-kun." She then appeared by Kamimuro's side and apologized, saying, "I had to kill the other Konoha genin and the old man." Kamimuro then kissed Haku on the cheek and said, "It's okay, just finish him off. I'll help Zabuza-sama." Haku then vanished when she noticed Kamimuro nodding approval. "You won't feel any pain, I promise," Kamimuro remarked calmly, pointing to Naruto's head as he peered down at the now helpless ninja. When he shot Naruto Uzumaki with his finger bone, the bullet flew right through his head, ending his life. In the spiritual world. After opening his eyes gradually, Naruto noticed that he was sleeping on a field of flowers. Naruto inquired, "What is this place?" A voice behind him responded to Naruto's query. The woman glanced at the now shocked Naruto and replied, "This is the spiritual realm, it's the place where you come when you die, Naruto." The Kyuubi no Yuko was the woman he was presently staring at. She had long red hair, was wearing a kimono, had 9 foxtails swinging behind her, and protruding ears that ended in points. Kentucky Kyuubi stared at Naruto with sadness as she replied, "What I mean is that you died, Naruto, and that's the reason why I'm free." Kentucky Kyuubi, how did you get out of the seal and what did you mean that this is the place where you come when you died? Naruto wondered nervously. Kyuubi apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, Naruto, for everything that happened in your life." "What are you talking about, Kyuubi? It's not your reason that the villagers were too stupid to see the difference between you and me." Kyuubi appeared happy, Naruto said. Kyuubi smiled and said, "Thank you for your forgiveness, Naruto. It means a lot to me." Kyuubi looked around and said, "But now I would like to know why we're still here and didn't pass over." Behind them, someone said, "Maybe I can answer that question." When they turned around, they noticed an elderly guy dressed in red, what appeared to be royal attire. Kyuubi questioned, "Avatar Roku, what are you doing here?" But she was terrified because she already knew what he would respond. "Join me," he asked, gesturing for them to follow. After letting out a sigh, Naruto's mother accompanied him to a table that had tea for 3. As he filled 3 teacups, Roku said, "Your duty calls guardian or your duty calls Naruto, you are the new fire guardian." "Wait, why I am the new fire guardian and what is this duty you're talking about?" replied Naruto. "Naruto, in my world there is 4 guardians, the dragon for wind, the raccoon dog for earth, the bear for water and the fox for fire, and Naruto mom here, pointed at Kyuubi, was to be the guardian of the Avatar, but she disappeared when she was needed most." Roku clarified and drank from his cup of tea. "I was summoned to your world by what you call it Uchiha, who brought me under his control with the Sharingan. He used me to fight the Shodaime, but the Uchiha lost and drove away. The Shodaime was so kind to set me free, but I couldn't get back to my own world, so I traveled the world in my human world. When I returned to Konoha a couple of years later, I met a young blonde man, and we fell in love after a few months, and 5 years later, I became pregnant with a little boy. However, the same Uchiha attacked me after he was born, controlled me once more, and had me assault Konoha. My lover was forced to lock me in you, Naruto, and Naruto's mother was watching Naruto to see how he would respond." As he sipped his tea, Naruto noticed that Roku nodded. "Wait, so you're telling me that because mom was sealed within me, she had to stay here, and I have to be the new fire guardian, the guardian of the Avatar?" he asked. Naruto smiled and said, "Sounds kind of fun, what should I do?" As he turned to face Roku, who turned to face him. Roku replied with a smile and drank his tea. "You will live in this realm for 6 years. You will spend your first year with your parents. After that, you will spend the remaining 5 years with training your bending abilities." Naruto asked the now standing Avatar, "So my father is also here? Where is he?" Roku replied, "He is speaking to Lady Faith and will be here soon. You can stay at his home while you're waiting." Then, suddenly, he disappeared. Naruto smiled as he looked at his mother and said, "He has to teach me that. So are we going to our new home?" As she left with her kid, Naruto's mother smiled and said, "Of course, let's see how your old man lives, and I still want to know more about you." She wanted to learn more about her son because she didn't know everything about him, just because she was sealed in him. In other parts of the realm. When a woman said, "Avatar Roku has spoken to your son," the father remarked, "Yeah, I thought so, what did he tell him?" The woman replied, "Only that he should be the new guardian, nothing more." In reference to Naruto and his mother, Naruto's father inquired once more, "What are they doing now?" "While sewing," she replied, "Your son is with his mother, and is happy to finally know her." He asked, continuing to gaze at the woman, "So he knows?" The woman smiled and turned to face the anxious father. "He knows that Kyuubi is his mother, Naruto mom, and I think he has figured out that you are his father," she said. "How will he react when he sees me?" The woman asked, grinning, as Naruto's father swallowed. As she resumed sewing, she responded, that is the joy of parenthood. You'll have to wait and see. No, not to your world. The Avatar approached him. We need your son in his world. The new Avatar will need his help in the war against the Fire Nation, she replied, sighing as Naruto's father Namikaze repeated, so we can't send him back to his world. Naruto's father started, Melody, but was cut off. The woman informed the Naruto father, who nodded in agreement, that your time and your mom's time are over, so you can't come with him. Spend the time he has here to know him, train him. But know this, he won't remember his past life, so you can't teach him jutsus. Naruto's father started, I'll teach him everything I know about swordmanship, hand-to-hand combat, but he had a question. The father of Naruto requested, Melody, could you tell me what elements Naruto will bend? The woman merely grinned and showed the tapestry to Naruto's father. You really should learn how to sew, Naruto father-kun. It's relaxing and helps one to focus their mind, the woman stated simply as she resumed sewing after Naruto's father's eyes widened as he glanced at the tapestry. In response to Naruto's father's query, the woman said, Naruto will have the ability to bend two main elements. But can you tell me? Will he be happy in his new life? Said Naruto's father after swallowing. She came to a halt and grinned at him. He will know love, he will have friends, and he will travel the world, have a lot of adventures, excitement. But he will know pain and suffering and loss as well. At least he will have it normal this time, she responded and began to stitch. The father of Naruto nodded and said, thank you, Melody. She smiled and gestured for him to leave, and he disappeared. Go spend time with your son. You still have duties to perform, she continued. It will be interesting to see what will happen from now on, she stated with a smile after sewing for a while before pausing to consider her work. From Naruto and their mother. Knowing that Roku had told Naruto and his mother where he lived, Naruto's father returned home. When Naruto's father heard laughter coming from the living room, he stopped and noticed that Naruto was cuddling up to his mother, who was laughing with him while they sat on a couch. Their eyes were on the verge of tears. Naruto hurried to embrace his father as soon as he spotted him. With a broad smile, Naruto remarked, I'm glad to meet you, Dad. With some nervousness, Naruto's father questioned, so you're not angry that I sealed your mother and you? Naruto hugged his father and remarked, no, I understand why you did it. I'm happy to be with you too at last. And Naruto's mother joined in, and the embrace evolved into a family embrace. As she gave him a firm embrace and met his eyes, Naruto's mother exclaimed, I miss you so much, my love. Naruto's father gave his family a firm hug and said, I'm happy to have you and Naruto by my side. I miss you too, honey. When they had calmed down, they both turned to face Naruto's smiling father and began to giggle. Now what did I miss? He inquired. Naruto's mom explained. Naruto here on the day before graduation decided to test his sneaking skills and painted the headmaster monument. She laughed. Hey, it showed that security sucked, and I did it in broad daylight wearing this outfit, Naruto's father said, raising an eyebrow at him. I could even outrun several ninja training and some high-level ninja, Naruto said, pulling his jacket away from his chest. The father of Naruto shook his head and reflected on his childhood activities. Naruto's father started, I heard you had a visitor while I was away. The father nodded, retrieved a chair from the kitchen, and took a seat. The mother nodded and turned to Naruto, saying, I would like to hear more about my son. When you told us your story, I can tell you every stupid thing your father did when he was alive and was the same age as you, she remarked with an upbeat grin. When Naruto's mom said, hey. Naruto's dad sulked. Naruto smiled, and although his father acknowledged that it was akin to his own, it was more of his mother's foxy smile. When he looked at Naruto's mom and Naruto, he could see how similar they were. The small points of Naruto's ears caught his attention. When he noticed the whisker marks, he realized that his son had them. In the hope that they would grant his final request, he cursed the community and himself. He made the decision to speak with Soul Reaper and to request permission to retrieve the souls from Konoha. He would say a few things to his wife and children, the people for whom he gave his life. But for the time being, they were once more a family. Looking at Naruto once more, the father thought, take Crocus, all for my sons, the world needs your light and laughter. He smiled as he stared at the most valuable person in his life. The young Naruto's 6 years passed by quickly. He was really happy during the first year he spent with his parents. He had learned the skill of earth bending from Roku for the previous 5. His father taught him swordmanship, bodily strength, and agility, while his mother taught him the technique of firebending. However, the father and mother of the Naruto were now discussing their son's future with Roku. After taking Roku's tea, Naruto's mom questioned, Roku, what did you tell my son, and what will happen to him in your world? The Avatar smiled and replied, I've told him many things since his arrival, and I don't know what will happen to him. Forget it, Naruto's mother scowled as she sipped her tea. The father of Naruto sipped from his cup of tea. You and the lady didn't tell us what would happen to our son. We just want to know if he will have good life, he said. Okura filled his teacup and said, I'm sorry, but I can't tell what will happen. The only thing you can do is look over him. Oka looked at the parents and said, his training with me is done. I have never seen anyone who learns so fast like your son has. He will be the greatest guardian. Just like his father, Naruto's mother said with a laugh, turning to face his father, who returned her smile. When Roku and the others turned around, they saw a youngster sparring with a man dressed in what appeared to be a blue battle outfit. Roku replied, I see, but let's see how good he has become. Quirk easily evaded the water whip from the previous avatar by jumping in the air, but Naruto's advance was unsuccessful, since he hit Quirk in the air with a massive fireball. He used both hands to strike the air, sending 2 pebbles in Quirk's direction, but he was too quick and shielded himself with his water. He wasn't hit, therefore it worked well, but Naruto vanished once he released the water. Someone said, looking for me, from behind him. However, he was struck by a stone that sent him to the ground before he could turn to look behind him. However, the attack did not stop there. Some rocks that Naruto had made with his bending skills held Quirk's arms and legs to the earth. Naruto smiled foxily and added, it seems that you lost, old man, when he let the rocks vanish once more. Quirk grinned and stood back up, saying, you've matured, Naruto. You didn't hit me once during our first spar, but now it's me who didn't hit you. Naruto said, thank you for everything, and bowed to his friend. Quirk grinned as he saw the others approaching them and said, you did great, Naruto. I'm sure you'll do great as a guardian and I'm very proud of you. I'm so proud of you, exclaimed Naruto's mother as she gave him a hug. Naruto was thrilled to hear that his parents loved him. When he saw his wife praising their kid, Naruto's father grinned and had to admit that he was also pleased. With a smile, Roku remarked, Naruto, your training with me is over. You have done great and I know you'll do great as the new fire guardian. But for now, rest with your parents and tomorrow you'll begin your new life. The joyful family then departed to spend their final time together. The following day, the time had come. When Roku came over to them and grinned, Naruto stood with his mother and stated, the time has come. Mom, where's Dad? Naruto said, looking at her, but he nodded. When Naruto mom said, he wanted to get you gift, Naruto father showed up beside her. I apologize for being late. These were specially made for you, Naruto's father remarked, handing him 2 knives. When Naruto said, Dad, I don't know what to say, but thanks, his father patted him, and his mother gave him another embrace. She hugged her kid and lamented, I wish I could go with you. I'll miss you so much. Mom, Naruto replied, giving her a stronger hug and allowing her to stroke his hair. She continued to hug him while glancing at Roku. The woman's voice was frightening. You better take good care of him, Avatar, or I will find you, and not even Kami herself will stop me from kicking your ass, she threatened. With a worried nod, the Avatar continued, your son will be fine, he's a strong bender, and he will have many good friends. When Naruto's mother gave him another embrace, she remarked, your father and I love you and will always be proud of you. I know Mom, I love you too, Naruto remarked, nodding his head and giving her a hearty hug in return. Before following Roku, he gave his father a final embrace. Since time had no significance here, no one could tell that they had been walking for hours. They came to a halt in front of a water pool. Remember all you've learned. When you arrive in my world, you'll be found by people that you can trust with your life. Roku remarked, placing a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto bowed to his teacher and said, thank you for everything, Master. I will do my best to help the Avatar to the best of my abilities. We will bring peace. I know you will, but remember Naruto, you are his guardian, you are not his teacher, and he has to search for them. You won't be able to remember your life as a ninja. When you wake up in my world you'll believe that you in this world trained in the ways of the guardian, but grew up in my world, Roku said as he stared at him. Roku offered him a red winter jacket and laughed, smiling slightly. One more thing. Take this jacket, you'll need it where you will go, she said. When Naruto nodded, he noticed that the Roku's avatar's marks were starting to light. Roku touched Naruto's head and said, good luck, Naruto, make us proud. Naruto felt as like he was sinking, and his body was getting heavier. The universe of Avatar. The southern continent. Naruto noticed just snow when he looked around. The blowing wind and the pouring snow made it difficult for him to see farther than a few feet. It was so cold that he shivered when he attempted to walk in the snow. His decision to keep the winter jacket from the ship was a wise one. He had lost his boat, but he had escaped the Fire Nation troops that were pursuing him. It seemed to get colder as he walked for hours. He collapsed to his knees, unable to move further as his legs grew numb, and felt his eyelids close before he heard voices. The whimpering male voice murmured, come on, Naruto friend. Please let us go back. That's not the Fire Nation. If I remember correctly, I'm near a water tribe village. Naruto pondered, and as he looked up, he saw 2 people in blue winter jackets with white fur. He and them appeared to be about the same age. The woman said, oh my god Sokka, look. Someone is lying in the snow, with a worried tone. Naruto noticed a female with brown hair and blue eyes just before he passed out. As Sokka assisted Naruto's companion in carrying him back to the village, she exclaimed, let's get him to the village, quickly before he dies. Village of the Southern Water Tribe. Naruto opened his eyes as he gradually began to regain consciousness, and realized he was in a tent. The voice next to him remarked, Yun Kitsune, it's good to see that you've finally woken up. He looked back and saw an elderly woman filling 2 cups of tea and passing one to Naruto, who was now seated. He said, thanks, after receiving the teacup. Naruto took a drink of his tea and said, but how did you know I was a kitsune? Where am I? Who are you and the two others outside the tents? As she watched her two grandchildren enter the tent, she remarked, ah, yes, you have many questions, but why don't we let our guests in? And took a sip of her tea. As he and his Naruto companion sat next to her, Sokka apologized, sorry about that Gran. We only wanted to know who he was, she said, it's okay, and turned to face Naruto. The reason I knew what you are, is simply to take a look, she added, grinning, and handed Naruto a little mirror. Naruto laughed and placed the mirror next to him. Oh yeah, that's right. My ears look a little fox-like in whisker marks. I totally forgot to hide them, he added. Pointing to Sokka, I said, you're in the Southern Water Tribe village. My name is Kana. This is Sokka. And this is Naruto friend. With a smile, she said, they are my grandchildren, and sipped her tea. Naruto remarked, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Naruto Kitsune, thanks for rescuing me from the cold, gazing at Sokka, who was giving him a skeptical look. Sokka continued to stare at Naruto as he refilled his teacup and questioned, why are you here and where you're from? I came from the Earth Kingdom but fled when some Fire Nation troops came and wanted to kill me. After a couple of days I was lucky to get a boat flee to the sea, but they followed me. After a storm I crashed here where you found me, Naruto said them as he drank his coffee. Naruto's companion commented, that's right after Sazin started the war. As she glanced at the others. He not only declared that dragons should be hunt for glory. No, he knew that the next avatar would be an airbender, and that a kitsune should be his guardian, so he also declared that they should be hunted. Kana continued, but for now, rest Naruto. You can sleep in this tent while you're here, and tomorrow you'll go with Naruto friend and Sokka fishing, and she left the house, followed by Sokka and her friend. The following morning, a little boat was seen drifting slowly in the icy waters of the South Pole. Sokka, Naruto, and his friend were inside, all dressed in winter coats. Sokka saw a fish swim by with a spear in his hand. It's not getting away from me this time, he said as he saw the fish's actions. He said, watch and learn, Naruto, to Naruto, who was observing his actions. His words, this is how you catch a fish, were repeated. The buddy of Naruto gave him a doubtful glance and said, you're right. She glanced down and saw another fish. She began to wave her hand after taking off her glove. The fish emerged from the sea in a globe of water. As she held the globe motionless, she called, Sokka, Naruto, look. SHH Naruto friend, you going to scare it away, Sokka whispered, keeping his gaze fixed on the fish. As she continued to swirl the globe in the air, he licked his lips and remarked, but Sokka, I caught one. I can already smell it boiling. Sokka swung his spear back into the globe, and it burst like a balloon. Returning to the sea, the fish leaped. Hey! Shouted Naruto's pal as the water splattered on Sokka and Naruto. Ah! They exclaimed. Sokka gave her friend Naruto a scowl. With a hint of rage, he asked, why is it that every time you play with magic water I get soaked? It's not magic, it's water bending, and it's he heard his Naruto buddy Yadara she moaned. Yeah, an ancient art unique to our culture, blah, blah, Sokka said. You've only told that like 1,000 times. Look, I'm just saying that if I had weird powers, I'd keep my weirdness to myself. When they heard Sokka's final statement, both Naruto and his pal raised an eyebrow. She exclaimed, you calling me weird? I'm not the one who needs to flex my muscles every time I see my reflection. Sokka glared at her as she demonstrated her point by flexing his muscles right then. A swift river swept the boat away, causing it to tremble. In order to avoid colliding with bits of ice, Sokka and Naruto began paddling. When Naruto's buddy noticed two pieces of ice moving toward a collision course in front of them, she exclaimed, watch out. The boat would be crushed if it were trapped between them. She said, go left. Go left. Before being crushed by the ice, the boat collided with multiple slabs of ice. They were driven onto a piece of ice after being ejected from the boat. They both knew they were trapped after looking around. Looking at Sokka, the Naruto pal questioned, you call that left? Sokka made a water-bending motion and remarked, you don't like my steering. Well, maybe you should have water-bended us out of the ice. My friend Naruto got up. So it's my fault, she exclaimed, quite irate. Naruto stood up and explained, no, of course not, Naruto friend, it was an accident. In an attempt to reassure his companion. Angrily, Sokka remarked, I knew I should have left you home. Leave it to a girl to mess things up. His pal Naruto gave him a scowl. She shouted, waving her arms and inadvertently bending the water behind her, you are the most sexist, immature, nut-brained. I'm embarrassed to be related to you. Behind her, the iceberg was starting to break. The eyes of Sokka and Naruto expanded. Ever since mom died I've been doing all the work around camp while you've been off playing soldier. Sokka muttered, Naruto friend. The cry caused the iceberg to fracture even more. I even washed all the clothes. Have you even smelled your dirty socks? Let me tell you it's not pleasant, she repeated. Naruto said, damn it, calm down. But his friend disregarded him and kept ranting at Sokka. Finally attracting Naruto's friend's notice, the iceberg shattered, revealing, no. That's it. I'm done helping you from now on, you're on your own. They were driven back when it collapsed. Okay, you've gone from weird to freakish, Naruto friend, Sokka replied. A little taken aback, she said, you mean I did that? Naruto grinned and replied, yep. Congratulations, as he glanced at his companion. Suddenly, they were drawn to a blue light coming from the sea. As it grew, the water bubbled. It turned out to be a dazzling iceberg that exploded out of the water. When Naruto's companion examined the iceberg attentively, he noticed two figures, one large and one small. The teens were startled when the tiny form opened its luminous eyes. Naruto said, it can't be. I thought I would never see this happen. Before leaping to the iceberg that was shining. Sokka and Naruto's friend followed, curious about what was going on. When they arrived, they were taken aback by what they saw. Naruto was hurling a flame at the iceberg with his fists. They were blown back when the iceberg cracked and produced a jet of air. Before it burst and the light erupted into the sky, it began to break right through the center. After a loud explosion, the tiger seals ceased their roaring. The same colored light looped down round the beam and struck the iceberg after shooting into what appeared to be a large hole in the sky. The teens could see when the steam cleared. They exchanged glances before turning back to the iceberg. As though he was waiting for something to happen, Sokka lifted his spear. He was spared a long wait. A luminous figure emerged from the iceberg. Someone with luminous eyes and a glowing arrow on his head. Sokka lifted his spear higher, but halted when the glow went out and he fell to the ground. Being quick, Naruto managed to capture him. In a whisper, Naruto said, it's him, it's really him. The Avatar has awakened. So that neither Sokka nor his friend could hear him. There were others who saw the light, besides Naruto, Sokka, and the tiger seals. An adolescent lad in red and black armor on a nearby metal boat gazed at the light with a hint of wonder, and then glared at it. Finally, he said. Except for a tiny patch of hair that developed into a ponytail, the majority of his head was shaved. But the scar that ran from his left eye to his ear was his most distinctive feature. An elderly man in red armor and robes was asked by the youngster, Uncle, do you realize what this means? Responding with a sigh, the man said, that I won't get to finish my game. It means, the boy stated, utterly disregarding the statement. The elderly guy groaned, that my search is about to come to an end. He thought, here we go again. The child looked at his playing uncle and said, that light came from an incredibly powerful source, it has to be him. Zuko's uncle responded, or it's just the celestial lights. We've been down this road before, Prince Zuko. I don't want you to get too excited over nothing, as he carried on with his card game. He showed him the tea and said, Sid, why don't you have a nice cup of calming jasmine tea? I don't need any tea calming tea. I need to capture the Avatar, said Zuko. Zuko repeated, helmsman. Steer the boat towards the light, and indicated the location of the light. With a sigh, the uncle layered one air card on top of the other. A wind blew through the space. Let's go back to the teens. Sokka jabbed his spear at him. Naruto knocked him off. He said, stop. And laid him down gently. Slowly, the bald one began to stir. He saw a boy with blonde hair when he opened his storm-gray eyes. However, he gasped upon seeing his Naruto pal and exclaimed, beautiful. Weakly, he whispered, I need to ask you something, to Naruto, who leaned slightly closer to the youngster. What? He inquired. The boy said, please come closer, once more. What is it? Inquired Naruto. The boy said eagerly, will you go penguin sledding with me? At his unexpected outburst of energy, Naruto's companion arched an eyebrow and heard him respond, sure, I guess. Sokka was examining the child with the arrow on his head while they conversed. He was dressed in yellow. He thought, Earth Kingdom. But was dismayed by the absence of green attire. He asked himself, orange and yellow. Why does that sound familiar? The bald child rose to his feet on his own. The child said, what's going on here? You tell us, Sokka said, gesturing toward him with his spear. He questioned, keeping his gaze fixed on the youngster, how'd you get in the ice? Why aren't you frozen? I'm not sure, was his response. They were all startled by a rumbling growl. The tattooed boy leaped down on a large fuzzy beast after scrambling up the ice hill. He attempted to rouse it up by saying, Appa, are you okay? Wake up, boy. As they walked round, the other three gasped when they saw Appa licking the arrow boy. The boy exclaimed with joy, you're okay. Sokka exclaimed, what the hell is that? This is Appa, my. However, before he could finish his response, Naruto interrupted him. Flying bison. Wow, I never thought I would see one for real. This is incredible. Naruto exclaimed, looking at Appa. Yeah, right, and this is Naruto friend, my flying sister, Sokka remarked mockingly as he gestured at her. Snot flew from Appa's nose as he sneezed. Sokka was left to get covered in snot as the boy ducked in time. Rolling on the ground, he exclaimed, you. Ugh. To remove it. Naruto grinned and remarked, don't worry, Sokka, it'll wash out. As he observed Sokka rolling in the snow. The bald lad asked Naruto's buddy, so, do you guys live around here? But Sokka cut her off before she could respond. He pointed his spear at the boy with the arrow mark and yelled, don't answer that. Did you see that crazy light beam? He was probably trying to signal the Fire Navy. Instead. While Naruto's friend rolled her eyes and remarked, oh yeah, a Fire Navy spy. You can tell by the evil looks in his eyes. Bulty smiled naively. Naruto exclaimed, "Give me that," and seized the spear from Sokka. "The paranoid one is my brother, Sokka, the blonde one is Naruto, and my name is Naruto friend." "You never told us your name," she remarked while staring at the child. "I'm Ayachu," the bald child exclaimed, sneezing and rushing off. He landed gently, smelled, and grinned as he stated, "My name is Ong." Sokka glanced at Ong and said, "You just sneezed and flew 10 feet in the air." With incredulity. He responded, "Really?" It felt higher than that, and raised his gaze to the sky. Naruto looked up into the air and then back to the others. "Yep, defiantly higher. I think it was more than 17 feet, he said. "You're an airbender," exclaimed my friend, who gasped. "Sure am," Ong grinned and replied. When Naruto murmured, "You're more than that. You're the Avatar," only Ong could hear. When Naruto murmured, "Don't worry, I won't tell them. It's up to you to do that. We can talk later," Ong nodded. After saying, "I think I've got the midnight sun madness. I'm going home where things make sense," Sokka turned around, but soon discovered there was no way off the iceberg. Giant light beams. Big holes in the sky. Flying bison. Airbenders. "I think I've got the midnight sun madness," she said. After saying, "Well, if you guys are stuck, Appa and I can give you a lift," Ong leaned forward onto Appa's head by air. Grinning, Naruto answered, "I'm definitely going with you. I always wanted to ride a flying bison," and he stepped into the rear saddle. "Thanks, we'd love a ride," said the Naruto friend, bowing. Sokka objected, saying, "Oh no, I am not getting on that fluffy snot monster." Naruto buddy smiled and added, "Are you hoping some other kind of monster will come along and give you a ride? You know, before you freeze to death." Sokka opened her mouth to speak, then paused and gave up. Naruto chuckled and remarked to his friend, "I like you." While Naruto and his friend appeared excited, Sokka crossed his arms in frustration. Ong yelled, "Okay. First-time flyers, hold on tight. Appa yup yup," he said, as Appa sprang into the air, flapping his tail before falling into the water and beginning to swim. When Sokka says, "Wow. That was truly amazing," she is sarcastic. Ong responded, "Appa's just tired. A little rest and he'll be soaring through the sky," and he raised his head in a soaring gesture. "You'll see," he said with a smile, especially at his friend Naruto. He gazed at her ocean blue eyes, tan skin, and brown hair. She noticed his look and questioned, "Why are you smiling at me like that?" He added, "Oh, I was smiling." As he heard Naruto smile and Sokka groan. One of the metal boats. Now dressed in bedrobes, Zuko gazed at the lowering sun. Iroh approached to say he was going to bed. He sighed. "A man needs his rest. Prince Zuko, you need some sleep. Even if you're right and the Avatar is alive, you won't find him. Your father, grandfather, and great-grandfather all tried and failed," he said. Zuko's eyes hardened as he said, because their honor didn't hinge on the Avatar's capture. His gaze remained fixed on the sun. "Mine does. This coward's 100 years of hiding are over," he murmured. "Let's go back to the teens." Staring up into the sky, Ong rested atop Appa's head. Naruto's gaze was fixed on the sea. Sokka had fallen asleep. The bored and exhausted Naruto buddy turned to Ong and remarked, "Hey." Ong gave her a glance and said, "Hey, what are you thinking of?" "Well, you're an airbender. I was wondering if you knew what happened to the Avatar," she said to him. Ong noticed that Naruto was staring at him, but he turned back to face his companion. No. I didn't know him. I knew people who knew him, but I didn't." "Sorry," he replied. With a hint of disappointment, she answered, "Okay, just curious." "Good night," Ong muttered, "sleep tight," and grimaced as he went away. When Naruto shouted out, "Good night, Ong." "Good night, Appa." "Good night, Naruto friend," Appa snarled. "Good night, Naruto," said Ong's pal from Naruto. The nightmare of Ong. In the midst of a storm, Ong woke up by himself in the saddle. He attempted, but was unable, to manage Appa's ring. As they fell into the sea, he let out a scream. They managed to return to the surface, but a wave pulled them downward. As Ong gradually lost consciousness, they both began to sink. He smashed his fists together as his eyes and tattoos suddenly lit. Around him and Appa, the water began to freeze. "Ong. Ong, wake up," said Naruto's pal. In the actual world. Ong opened his eyes. He gasped and sat up. Naruto laughed and said, "Man, and people say I'm a heavy sleeper." The Naruto friend urged, "Come on, get ready. We're in the village and everyone wants to meet you," as Ong was putting on his clothes. The bunch of women and small children were waiting outside when his friend Naruto dragged him outdoors. "Ong, this is the village." "Entire village, Ong," a buddy of Naruto told the locals. They gave the bald boy a quick glance before gradually pulling away. Ong asked his pal Naruto, "Why are they looking at me like that?" "They're afraid of you," Naruto responded on her behalf after recognizing the expression in their eyes. Kana took the initiative. "Not so much afraid as surprised. No one has seen an airbender in 100 years. We thought they were extinct until my granddaughter and grandson found you," she said. Ong muttered, "Extinct? What's she talking about?" he asked himself. "This is my grandmother," the elderly woman was introduced by a Naruto friend. "Simply, call me Gran, she said. "What is this, a weapon?" "You can't stab anything with this," Sokka exclaimed, grabbing Ong's staff as he was examining it. Ong sucked the staff back to him via airbending. He clarified, it's used for airbending, not stabbing. Wings that resembled orange fans emerged. While clapping in her hands, a young girl exclaimed, magic trick, do it again. With a sweet smile. It allows me to control the air currents around my glider and fly, Ong clarified, adding, it's not magic, it's airbending. Last time I checked, humans couldn't fly. Ong grinned as Sokka snorted. He said, check again, and launched himself into the air. To the amazement of the locals, he glided into the air, performing loops, spins, and twists. Ong was too preoccupied with all the attention he was receiving to see the snow tower he collided into a few seconds later. He tumbled out and hit the floor. My watchtower, exclaimed Sokka. That was amazing, remarked Ong's Naruto friend as they assisted him up. The kids looked at Naruto. One boy said, can you do that? The kids moaned as Naruto shook his head and declared, I can't fly. He smiled as he repeated, but I could show you the Kitsun illusion. The identical boy said, an illusion, as he turned to face the blonde who was now grinning and had abruptly transformed into a second Sokka. Everyone's jaws dropped and their eyes widened. Hello, he said, sounding like Sokka. As Naruto strolled around the villagers, Ong exclaimed, that's so cool. With a broad smile. I'm Sokka, a moody, stuck-up, jerk of a warrior, Sokka added, making everyone laugh. Yes you do, replied the Naruto friend, still smiling, as Sokka hurled a snowball at him and said, I don't sound like that, and I don't act like that. Sokka turned to see that Naruto had altered again. He saw that Naruto nodded when he said, hey Naruto, can I talk to you alone? They left the group behind. When he noticed that Naruto sighed, Sokka said gravely, you firebender, aren't you? Naruto looked at the shocked Sokka and said, yeah, I am, but don't think I'm Fire Nation's spy. What I told you after you saved me wasn't a lie, but what I didn't tell you was that I'm the Fire Guardian. With a startled tone, Sokka questioned, you mean you're the Guardian of Avatar? Who is it and where is he? He was dismayed by what he heard, but he still sought answers. After hearing Ong remark, Naruto responded, if he wants to tell you he will, and returned to the others. Ong glanced at his pal Naruto and said, you're a waterbender. The friend of Naruto shrugged. After telling him, well, sort of. Not yet, she watched her grandmother approach them. Kana remarked, alright. No more playing. Naruto friend has chores, and then she and her grandma left. The Naruto friend moaned. She said with excitement, I can't believe it, Gran. I finally found a bender to teach me. When Kana warned her grandchild, Naruto friend, don't put all of your hopes in that boy. According to a friend of Naruto, but Ong's special, I can tell. I can sense he's full of wisdom. They turned to face Ong. His tongue was affixed to his staff. The kids chuckled and said, see. Now my tongue is stuck to my staff. On a Fire Nation vessel. 2 members of his firebending crew confronted Zuko. Iroh sat close by and watched. Again, he exclaimed. They dodged the fire blasts that Zuko threw at them. Zuko dodged one soldier's explosion in retaliation before he backflipped over another soldier's blast. Zuko kicked and punched bursts of fire at them both while in midair, but they deflected it. He landed with his opponents facing him. Iroh sighed and fired a fire blast that missed Zuko's face, saying, no. Power in firebending comes from the breath, not the muscles. The breath becomes energy in the body. The energy extends past your limbs and becomes fire. Get it right this time, he repeated in a firm tone. Zuko angrily told his uncle, enough. I've been drilling this set all day. Teach me the next set, I'm more than ready. Iroh exclaimed, no. You are impatient. You haven't mastered the basics yet. Drill it again. Before taking a seat. Zuko snarled and sent a guard flying with flames. The sages tell us that the Avatar is the last airbender. He must be over 100 years old. He's had a century to master the elements. I'll need more than basic firebending to defeat him, Zuko screamed as he stared at Iroh. Iroh scowled. Zuko almost shouted, you will teach me the advanced set. Iroh gave in and said, alright, but I have to finish my roasted duck first. How did he go from strict master to disgusting slob? Zuko pondered, grimacing at his uncle's picking up. Returning to the village. When the Fire Nation struck, Sokka was directing his men. Sokka turned to his warriors, his 6-year-old soldiers, and said, now men, it's important to show no fear when facing a firebender. In the Water Tribe, we fight till the last man standing. For without courage, how can we call ourselves men? One boy declared, I have to go pee. The child raised his hand once more as Sokka reminded them, listen. Until your fathers return from the war, they're counting on you to be the men of the tribe, so no potty breaks. The youngster objected, but I really have to go. Sokka sighed and asked, a little irritated. Every child put up their hand and said, okay. Who else has to go? After giving himself a forehead smack, Sokka concluded, we're doomed. As she approached her brother, Naruto's companion inquired, have you seen Ong? When she repeated, Gran said he disappeared over an hour ago. Ong emerged from a tiny igloo. He grinned and remarked, wow. You were right, Naruto, everything freezes in there. When Ong said that, Naruto laughed. He pointed to the snow and added, see how I wrote my name? The kids chuckled. With a moan, Sokka turned to face his sister. He yelled, Naruto friend, get them out of here. This lesson is for warriors only. As he observed the kid sliding down Appa's tail and landing in a mound of snow. Sokka shouted and scowled at the two outsiders, stop. Stop it now. Instead. What's wrong with you? We don't have time for fun and games with the war going on. Aang climbed down from Appa and said, war. Gazing at the three teenagers, he said, what are you talking about? A sardonic you're kidding, right? Sokka asked. Naruto replied, no, he doesn't know, as he turned to face Sokka. Penguin. Aang yelled as he glanced behind Sokka, and the penguin waddled off. Aang zipped after it with airbending. Naruto and the siblings gazed at the spot where Aang had fled. With a cynical tone, Sokka repeated, he's kidding right? Naruto sighed as he pursued Aang, saying, oh man, he has a lot to learn. Field of penguins. In search of their aim, Naruto and their friend entered the field. Aang was seen chasing penguins by a buddy of Naruto. Come on little guy. I want to go sledding. They gazed at Aang in the snow, face down. He grinned as he turned to face them. Aang began to walk and talk like a penguin, making the other two laugh, saying, I have a way with animals. My friend laughed. Aang, I'll help you catch a penguin if you teach me waterbending. Deal. Aang grinned and exclaimed. As he came to learn, but I'm an airbender not a waterbender, isn't there someone else who can teach you? The buddy of Naruto shook her head. She looked at Aang, who was looking contemplative, and replied, no. You're looking at the only waterbender in the whole South Pole. What about the northern tribe? They still have a lot of waterbenders who could teach you, Naruto said, turning to face his companion. Maybe, but we haven't had contact with our sister tribe in a long time, and it's on other side of the world, and Naruto buddy replied. Yeah, but you are forgetting that I have a flying bison. Appa and I could personally fly you to the North Pole and find a master to teach you waterbending, Aang replied with a grin. I don't know. I've never left home before. Naruto buddy replied with uncertainty. Well, you think about it. In the meantime, could you please teach me how to catch a penguin? Aang responded. Naruto added, I want to learn too, grinning Foxy. After explaining that catching penguins is an ancient and sacred art, she took out two fish and threw them at the lads. Okay, listen closely, my young pupils. Penguins immediately swarmed them. After a few minutes, while riding penguins, Aang, Naruto's companion, and Naruto darted into a snowbank. They whooped and laughed as they raced down the slope. Aang outran the other two after jumping down an ice ramp. In order to catch up to him, Naruto and his friend leaped down their own ramp. Aang smiled and turned to face the grinning Naruto friend, saying, this is awesome. I know. I haven't done this since I was a kid, she said. Naruto smiled and continued, you're still a kid. They went through a tunnel of ice. The experience became bizarre as light streamed in from several openings, producing a variety of blue hues. They stopped in front of an ice-frozen ship after sliding out of the tunnel. Whoa, what is that? Aang said, glancing at the ancient vessel. A Fire Navy ship and a very bad memory for my people, replied a friend of Naruto, who was examining the flag of the Fire Nation. Aang also made his way to the ship. Aang turned and stated, if you want to be a bender, you have to let go of fear. Naruto's friend warned Aang, wait, we're not allowed to go in there. The ship may be booby-trapped. Despite gulping, Naruto's pal followed Aang inside the ship. The final person to board the ship was Naruto. While the other teenagers seemed unaffected, Naruto's companion was frightened by the ship's corridors. Observing her uneasiness, Naruto said, why are you so scared, Naruto friend? The companion of Naruto replied, this ship has haunted my tribe since Gran was young. It was part of the Fire Nation's first attacks, as she surveyed the vessel. Now looking at his friend Naruto, Aang remarked, okay, back up, I have friends all over the world, even in the Fire Nation. I've never seen any wars. We have to tell him Naruto friend, Naruto replied, turning to face his friend. Naruto's pal turned to face Aang. She looked at Aang, who was looking contemplative, and said, yeah, you're right. Aang. How long do you think you were in that iceberg? He looked at Naruto and his companion and replied, I don't know. A few days maybe. Naruto stated quite solemnly, Aang, you were in the iceberg for 100 years. What? He exclaimed. That's impossible. Do I look like a 112-year-old man to you? Asked Aang. Well, think about it, Aang. The war is a century old. You don't know about it because, somehow you were in there that whole time. It's the only explanation, replied the friend of Naruto. Aang fell to the ground after stumbling backward into the wall. He remarked, it's unbelievable, we're so far away from home. A friend of his knelt beside him. She comfortingly remarked, I'm sorry, but maybe there's a bright side to this. He grinned and continued, well, I did get to meet the two of you in Sokka. When Aang spoke, Naruto and his friend grinned. She repeated, see. Let's get out of here, and she and Aang got to their feet. They entered a dimly lit room. Guys, let's go back. This place is creepy, commented a little apprehensive Naruto buddy. Aang stumbled on a wire as soon as he said, what are you talking about, Naruto friend? There's nothing to worry about as long as I'm here. They were shut in by a great door that fell down. Naruto smiled and replied, what was it you said about booby traps? Embarrassed, Aang massaged his head and murmured, my bad. Around them equipment began to go off. A buddy of Naruto thought, I have a bad feeling about this. A blaze erupted into the heavens. All three of them gazed at it. Damn it, mumbled Naruto. Aang lifted the brighter look of a Naruto buddy. He leaped through a hole in the roof and said, hold on. Naruto leaped to follow him. Unaware that they were being monitored, they leaped down. On the Fire Nation vessel. Zuko turned his gaze to the swing individuals. Whoever he is, he's quite agile for his age, he said aloud. He said, wait my uncle. Tell him I found the Avatar. And turned to face the settlement they were heading toward via the telescope. Zuko repeated, as well as his hiding place, and gave the community a final stare. You're mine now, he thought. Naruto traveled back to the village with his friend Aang. The flare was still in the sky as Naruto's friend turned to face it. That gave her a strong sense that trouble was on the horizon. The friend of Naruto looked forward. Every villager was standing outside the community. The majority of the kids rushed outside and clustered around the boys as they got closer. I knew it. You signaled the Fire Navy with that flare. You're leading them here, Sokka said, pointing to the guys. The Naruto friend defended them by saying, they didn't do anything. It was an accident. Aang turned to face the gazing audience and said, yeah, we were on the ship. And the booby trap. I set it off, the back of his neck was rubbed. Weakly, he concluded, my bad. Naruto friend, you shouldn't have gone on that ship. Now we could all be in danger. Gran said gravely as she shook her head and turned to face her grandchild. Aang remarked, don't blame Naruto friend, she warned me about the ship, but I didn't listen, and I convinced her to go her, Aang remarked in support of his friend Naruto. Aha! Sokka said with triumph. The traitor confesses. Warriors away from the enemy, he instructed. He stated gravely, the foreigners are banned from our village. Sokka, you're making a mistake, protested a buddy of Naruto. Sokka shot back, no. I'm keeping my promise to Dad, he said, I'm protecting you from threats like them. As he gave his pal a serious look. They're not our enemy, shouted Naruto's friend. Don't you see? They've brought us something we haven't had in a long time. Fun, she repeated, her anger toward her brother growing. Sokka laughed. Fun? We can't fight firebenders with fun. Naruto noted, you also can't fight them with 6-year-olds, and turned to face Sokka. Sokka shouted, get out of our village. A buddy of Naruto begged, grandmother, please don't let Sokka do this. Naruto friend, you knew going on that ship was forbidden. Sokka is right. I think it is best if the outsiders leave, Kana said with seriousness. The buddy of Naruto was taken aback. Were they blind to the danger posed by Aang and Naruto? She was furious with Sokka for her oppressive behavior. She is upset with her grandmother for having such a limited perspective. She could, in fact, make such a choice if Sokka could. It was fine. She cried. She seized them by the arm and left, saying, then I'm leaving too. Come on guys, let's go. He stared at her and asked, where do you think you're going? Naruto's pal said, to find a waterbender. They're taking me to the North Pole. Aang blinked. We are? He asked, glancing at Naruto, who shrugged before beaming. Great. Sokka scowled. Sokka said aloud, Naruto friend. You wouldn't choose them over your tribe, your own family, would you? This caused my friend to pause and reflect. She felt a touch on her shoulder and said, I don't know. Would I? Naruto was the one. After saying, Naruto friend, family isn't something you should take for granted. Stay with them, Naruto approached Appa. Then he followed Naruto to Appa. Naruto friend, I don't want to come between you and your family, Aang said. With grief in her voice, Naruto's buddy replied, so, you're leaving the South Pole. So this is a goodbye? She inquired one again in sorrow. Aang answered, afraid so, with similar sadness. One of the Naruto friends questioned, where will you go? Aang came to the realization, I guess I'll head back home and check for the airbenders. Wow, I haven't cleaned my room in 100 years. Not looking forward to that. Naruto smiled at Aang and said, mind if I come along? I have nowhere to go and 2 is better than 1. With a sure response, Aang and Naruto got onto Appa. Sokka scoffed, let's see your bison fly now, airboy. Appa moaned but merely got to his feet. Come on Appa, you can do it. Yip yip. Snorting, Sokka remarked, I thought so. The young girl ran up beside her Naruto friend and cried. She pleaded, don't go. We'll miss you, in a sorrowful tone. Aang said her farewell after giving her a sorrowful glance. We'll miss you too. Waving, Naruto remarked, goodbye. Aang glanced at his friend Naruto, who returned his gaze with sorrowful eyes. They departed the village after Aang turned away and snatched the reins. Tragically, the young girl walked back. Gran approached his pal Naruto. Naruto friend, you'll feel better after you, she began, but was interrupted by her companion. She almost shrieked and rushed away, leaving Gran feeling bad. You're happy now? There goes my one chance of becoming a waterbender, she said. Sokka shouted to his troops, all right, get our defenses ready. The Fire Nation could be on our shores any moment. One of the boys said, but but Sokka cut him off. A little irritated, he exclaimed, and no potty breaks. After a few minutes, in the hulls of an ice formation lay Aang, Naruto, and Appa. Appa growled. With a yeah, I liked her too, Aang answered. Naruto began, Aang, I have to tell you something, and noticed that Aang was paying attention. Naruto looked at Ong and inquired, did the monks ever tell you about the guardian of Avatar? Yeah, they told me that every Avatar had a guardian. Roka's guardian was the wind guardian. Together they were a great team. The monks also told me that my guardian would be a fire guardian, Ong said. Naruto remarked, that's right. I am your fire guardian, Ong, as he turned to face the startled Ong. Ong gazed at the water and remarked, I'm glad you told me, Naruto, but it seems we have a problem. Naruto gasped as he followed his eyes. Shit, it's a Fire Nation Navy ship. It's heading to the village, remarked the man. Ong exclaimed, we have to help them. Appa, wait here. Come on, Naruto, and he and Naruto set out to rescue the community. Within the village, Sokka made the decision to dress as a real water tribe warrior in order to confront the fire country. He adjusted his tunic, put on his toughest leathers, put on his gloves, and painted his face in black, white, and gray battle paint. The nation boat on fire. Zuko was put into his armor with the assistance of his servants. With this battle, he was not taking any chances. On his head was a helmet with a flame insignia on the front. Zuko anticipated that this would be the most difficult battle of his life. He had no idea how mistaken he would be. Returning to the village. As a lookout, Sokka stood atop the ice wall. A rumbling roar boomed, and all of a sudden, everything began to tremble. The folks raised their heads in horror. Sokka's watchtower was among the pieces of the ice wall that collapsed. "Oh man," groaned Sokka. Through the fog, a massive shadow was visible coming toward the village. "Oh man," broke Sokka's voice. The ice cracked all the way into the settlement as the ship broke through it. A kid was narrowly saved from the crack by an Naruto pal. After placing him in a tent, she looked at her brother. Sokka remained on the wall, his club lifted as if he would use it to assault the ship. The scream of his Naruto friend was heard. "Sokka, get out of the way." Pride, tenacity, fear, and foolishness prevented him from doing so, even if he wanted to. When the ship eventually hit the wall, it fell back. Sokka merely slid backwards because the section he was standing on somehow remained intact. Sokka just dodged out of the way as the bowsprit screamed and opened down, nearly crushing him. When the steam subsided, Zuko and a number of Fire Nation soldiers became visible. Zuko peered across the throng as they made their way down the new gangplank, searching for someone who might have been an Avatar. With a war yell, Sokka charged at Zuko after adjusting his bearing. Zuko kicked Sokka straight into the snow after effortlessly kicking the club away. The ease with which Sokka was beaten caused the tribe to gasp. When the soldiers arrived, they took a step back. "Where are you hiding him?" Zuko asked, glancing at the throng. The locals remained silent, perplexed. Gran was pulled from the crowd by him. They still didn't understand Zuko when he said he'd be about this age and is master of all four elements. After pushing Gran away, he unleashed a barrage of fire above their heads. It made the villagers wince. Zuko said, "I know you're hiding him." Recuperated from the fall, Sokka grabbed his club and hurled another war cry at Zuko. Zuko let out a mental sigh. He dove beneath Sokka and flipped him over his head, thinking, "Stupid water peasants." Then Zuko blasted Sokka with fire. Rolling aside, Sokka hurled his boomerang toward the fire prince. Zuko barely escaped getting struck in the head by it. With the exclamation, "Show no fear," a little boy threw Sokka a spear, and Sokka charged at Zuko a third time without any greater success than the first two. The spear's head was easily broken by Zuko, who then grabbed it from Sokka and repeatedly struck him in the head, bringing him to the ground. The boomerang resurfaced behind Zuko, striking him in the head and dislodging his helmet. Glaring down at Sokka, he adjusted it again. His hand created two daggers of fire. Before he could act, Ong used his staff to sweep the firebender off his feet as he glided in from behind on a penguin. Zuko's helmet landed on his butt, which was in the air as he landed face down. As Ong slid past the applauding kids, snow covered them. Infuriatingly, they paused and then resumed. Ong pushed the irate penguin away and slid to a stop. Ong said, "Hey Naruto friend, hey Sokka," as if nothing had happened. "Hey Ong," Sokka said dryly, "thanks for coming." Zuko stood up and assumed a position that involved bending fire. Ong grasped his staff in front of him while maintaining a solemn expression. "Give up. You have no chance in winning this fight," Ong declared. Zuko smiled and looked at the now happy Ong. "Don't make me laugh. You're the one without a chance," Zuko stated. Suddenly, Naruto leaped out of the snow and launched a fireball at Zuko, but Zuko was too quick to be hit. Naruto, a buddy of Naruto, smiled. Zuko could now concentrate on Ong as he could see that Naruto was now engaged in combat with his warriors. "You're the airbender. That means you're the Avatar," exclaimed Zuko. The eyes of all expanded. Ong and Zuko circled one another. "I've spent years preparing for this encounter. Training, meditating, and now I find out that the Avatar is a child," Zuko yelled. Ong's posture eased. "Well, you're just a teenager," he shrugged. Zuko hit Ong with multiple bursts of fire. Ong spun his staff in his direction. The villagers, however, cried out as some of the fire reached over their heads. Ong understood that an innocent person would be harmed if this went on. Ong signaled his surrender by asking, "If I go with you, will you promise to leave everyone alone?" After realizing there were no dangers, Zuko never intended to hurt anyone. He would not hurt innocent individuals, but he was not above frightening and menacing women and children. Zuko gave a nod. A soldier led On to the ship after he took his staff. A friend of Naruto hurried forward. She screamed, "No, On. Don't do this." On was shoved ahead after grinning at her and telling her, "Don't worry, Naruto friend, it'll be okay." He continued, "Naruto, look after Appa for me until I return," and Naruto nodded. Zuko gave the order, had a course to the Fire Nation. "I'm going home." As the gangplank ascended, On smiled sorrowfully back at the tribe. When he noticed that his Naruto friend was crying, his smile vanished. He felt guilty after seeing his Naruto friend, even though he knew that giving himself up was the greatest thing he could do for the town. The ship began to leave when the bowsprit closed all the way. Neither the disappearance of Naruto nor the fact that Zuko arrived with 6 soldiers and departed with 7 were observed. Had been taken several hours ago. The villagers were in a gloomy mood. They were powerless when the Fire Nation stole the last hope for peace in the world, in addition to having already expelled the Avatar from their village. While Sokka carried some things behind her, Naruto's companions stood out at the water's edge, gazing at the horizon. "We have to go after that ship, Sokka. Saved our tribe, now we have to save him," said a buddy of Naruto. "Naruto friend but why can't you realize that he's on our side? If we don't help him, no one will. I know you don't like but we owe him," and Sokka was interrupted by the friend. "Naruto friend," Sokka said, fed up with his sister's tirade. He pointed to a canoe that was ready to sail and asked, "Are you coming with me or are you going to talk all day?" His pal gave him a joyful gasp and embraced him. Sokka smiled as he glanced at his sister, who flushed, and said, "Get in. We're going to save your boyfriend." A voice interrupted, asking, "What do you two think you're doing?" Gran was staring at them sharply before grinning at them as they turned to face him. She smiled and gave them a blue bundle, startling the 2 teenagers. "You'll need these. You have a long journey ahead of you," she remarked. Kana turned to Sokka after hugging her Naruto companion and saying, "It's been so long since I've had hope. But you brought back to life, my little waterbender." Sokka rose erect, anticipating some kind of recognition. "And you, my brave warrior." She gave him a hug and added, "Be kind to your sister." Deflated, Sokka hardly gave his grandmother a hug in return, muttering, "Yeah. Okay, Gran. Is the Avatar. He's the world's only chance. You both found him for a reason. Now your destinies are intertwined with his," Kana said to her kids. When Naruto's companion saw the canoe, he started to perspire. She remarked, "There's no way we're going to catch up with the warship with this." And then Appa roared up from over a hill. "Appa." She joyfully went in the direction of the sky bison. Angrily, Sokka said, "You just love taking me out of my comfort zone, don't you?" He looked around and said, "And where's Naruto? Why isn't he coming with us?" Yet again. The nation boat on fire. Zuko was gripping Aang's staff as they faced one another on the ship's deck. His uncle and a guard were at his side. Aang was encircled by Zuko's guards and had his hands cuffed behind him. Zuko examined the employees. His eyes shifted to Aang. "This will make an excellent gift for my father," he remarked. "I suppose you wouldn't know of fathers being raised by monks," he remarked once more, grinning evilly. Aang gave Zuko a scowl. He gave Iroh the staff and turned to leave. "Take the Avatar to the prison hold. And take this to my quarters," he said. Iroh passed the staff to the guard beside him after giving him a quick glance. It was more of an order than a query. "Hey, you mind taking this to his quarters for me?" As he was led to the ship's lowest decks, Aang turned back to his staff. Aang's gaze reached the guards. He smiled as he thought, one in front, 2 behind him, not a problem. "So? I guess you never fought an airbender before. I bet I can take you all on with my hands tied behind my back," stated the man. "Silence," yelled one of the guards following him. When they came to a door, they paused so the lead guard could open it. Aang inhaled deeply as one of the guards behind him, startling both Aang and the other guard, lifted his hand and punched the guard next to him. "What are you doing?" questioned the lead guard. With a chuckle, the guard changed into Naruto. "Naruto," exclaimed Aang, startled. Startled, the guard said, "What the hell?" and assumed a combat position. Aang took a sharp breath and unleashed a powerful wind that knocked the guard unconscious by slamming him into the door. However, this resulted in Aang flying all the way down the corridor into Naruto. While Aang sprang from Naruto onto the deck unharmed, Naruto bore the brunt of the hit. Aang looked at Naruto and inquired, "You okay, Naruto?" Naruto gave him a light-headed glance. He replied with a tiny smile and got back up, saying, "Yeah, just fine, but don't that again." Aang questioned, "What are you doing here, Naruto?" Naruto released him. "I wouldn't be a great guardian if I let you die so fast," Naruto smiled in response. Aang turned to see where his staff had been led. The call came from Naruto, "Aang, let's go." Aang kicked the door open while bending the air and said, "Wait. I need to get my glider back." Naruto repeated, "We don't have time for that. We've got to go now." Aang turned to face him and said, "We wouldn't have to swim in freezing cold water if we get my glider back." Aang smiled as he told Naruto this. Naruto trailed Aang into the command tower, saying, "What are we waiting for? Let's get that glider." However, one of the guards who was supposed to take Aang to the cell was still conscious. The guard shouted, "There's a stowaway on board. He's freed the Avatar." By the siblings and Appa. But the groaned, Sokka made another attempt. Go. Fly. Soar. He and his sister had been riding Appa, the flying bison, for the last 10 minutes. Rolling his eyes, Sokka remarked, more like Appa the normal bison. Please Appa, we need your help. Ong needs your help, a buddy of Naruto begged in vain. Up. Ascend. Elevate, Sokka attempted once more, but to no avail. After glaring at Sokka, the Naruto friend attempted to start Appa flying once more, saying, Sokka doesn't believe you can fly, but I do Appa. She massaged his head. She repeated, come on. Don't you want to save Ong? And then Sokka had an idea. He wondered himself, what was it that Ong said? He attempted, yeehaw. Hop hop. Wahoo. Appa moaned and fanned his tail, leaping into the air. Yup yup. You did it Sokka. A cheerful Naruto friend exclaimed. Sokka was more thrilled than before. He's flying. He's flying. Naruto friend he said, calming down when he saw his smug expression. But he couldn't help but smile, saying, I mean, big deal, he's flying. Returning to the ship. While running down another hallway, Ong and Naruto kept an eye out for any potential attackers. Ong pondered, come on staff, where are you? Naruto glanced down the corridor. Naruto pondered gravely, we have to get down the ship fast, adjective. They encountered 3 guards as they turned the corner. They pointed their spears at them in response to Ong's feeble smile and question, have you seen my staff around? Ong sprinted past them, following the ceiling and walls. Thanks anyway, he returned the phone call. They turned back to Naruto, who had flame hands, after examining the trail of dust he left behind. You wouldn't be hurt if you move out of my way, Naruto stated gravely, adjective. The anxious soldier followed his instructions to the letter. Ong leaped into a different passageway where a soldier with firebenders was present. He was hit by a burst of fire from the soldier. Ong leaped over the soldier and the torrent of fire in one quick motion. He unleashed an air blast at the soldier upon landing, knocking him unconscious and sending him to the ground. Icky hop ited. Ong searched multiple rooms for his staff. He cringed when he opened the door to a different room and saw that it was inhabited. When he saw that the old man was sleeping, he became a little more relaxed. He discreetly apologized to the sleeping man and closed the door gently. In his haste to go, he checked a few more rooms and nearly missed an open one that contained what he was looking for. He started toward the employees, but he halted when the door closed. Zuko was glaring at him when he turned around. Using Naruto. Naruto ran into the hallway that Ong had just entered and grinned as he gazed at the unconscious soldier. He called for Ong loudly as he went down the hall, inspecting every room. He shouted, Ong. Into a different room. Iroh's eyes whitened, then he glanced at Naruto wearily. Fast and prepared for battle, Naruto landed in a firebending stance. Iroh gazed at Naruto, examining every inch of him. Iroh didn't say anything for approximately a minute. He filled a teacup with tea and asked, did you come for your little friend, Guardian? He repeated, do you want some jasmine tea? Naruto blinked. His adversary was grinning and extending an offer of tea. Naruto gave a shrug. He took a sip from the cup and said, air, thanks. Naruto, who's a guardian, said, that's a good tea, but tell me, how did you know? Iroh took a drink of his own tea and grinned. The Avatar is in the last room on the hall. I knew your mother, Naruto mom. A great woman, but that's a story for another day, Iroh added, turning to Naruto as he hurried out of the room. In Zuko's chamber. He eventually locates and captures the Avatar after nearly 3 years of seeking, but he flees within 5 minutes. Of course Zuko thinks to himself. For him, nothing has ever been simple. What makes this different? Zuko grinned when the Avatar reached for the staff, which he purposefully left exposed. The Avatar was trapped in the room when he closed the door behind which he was hiding. Zuko only replied, looks like I underestimated you, before launching a series of fireballs. Ong ducked. Ong had to dodge additional fireballs as he rolled into a corner and attempted to collect his breath. He circle walked to stay behind Zuko after rolling beneath him. Unable to hit, Zuko snarled and leaped aside to gain some distance, thinking, close combat isn't going to work. He continued to blast, but the flames died when Ong twisted the air away from the fire. After that, Ong leaped into the air and created an air scooter, which she used to navigate the room while avoiding all of the explosions. Naruto kicked Zuko in the back as the door flew open. While Naruto flopped back beside Ong, who got his staff back, Zuko flew back into his mattress. Ong bent the air and slammed Zuko and the mattress against the wall and then the ceiling. When Zuko looked up, the 2 boys were gone. Ong and Naruto opened the bridge's hatch and stuck their heads out to check if everything was okay. The helmsman was there, but their escape route was beyond him. Ong opened his glider and leaped out for them as they hurried out onto the viewing deck. Then he called, hop on. On the back of Ong's glider, Naruto leaped. Ong made the idea, we're out of here. Regretfully, Zuko wasn't finished with them. He had seized Ong's foot after leaping from the observation deck. When Ong was unable to bear the combined weight of Zuko, Naruto, and himself, they all fell into the deck. The 3 of them stood up and re-squared. Ong was standing in an air-bending position, while Zuko and Naruto were in a fire-bending position. They were all prepared for battle. They turned away from one another and looked up when they heard a snarl. Zuko exclaimed, "What is that?" aloud. "Appa," cried Aang joyfully. "Wow," Naruto exclaimed in awe. They could see Sokka in his saddle and Naruto's friend as Appa drew nearer. Zuko nearly burned Aang when he was preoccupied with Appa. He twirled his staff, just avoiding the blast. He nearly fell overboard when he leaped back to dodge another blast. Being quick, Naruto shot Zuko a few fireballs, but he dodged them all. A fire blade was hurled at Naruto by Zuko's sweep kick. It moved too quickly for him to evade it, and he was struck. He was driven hard into the ship's rail by the attack. Now that Naruto was out of the way, Zuko focused on the bald monk and fired multiple bursts of fire at him, the final one knocking Aang's staff away. Aang landed on the rail after dodging another burst of flames. Aang was unable to avoid Zuko's next ball of fire this time. He lost consciousness and plunged into the ocean over the side of the ship. "Aang. Nu," exclaimed Naruto's companion. The Avatar was Aang. He was meant to make the world a more peaceful place. Death was not intended for him. Not in this manner. "Aang," she said once more. Sokka appeared just as astonished as she did. He didn't deserve it, even though he didn't like the child. He sacrificed his life to save our village. He reflected sorrowfully, no one should have to die that young. He gasped as he glanced at Naruto. "Naruto, look out." As soon as the boy fell overboard, Zuko's eyes widened. That was not intended to occur. Instead of killing the Avatar, he was meant to capture him. He didn't think his father would allow him to return home, even if he admitted to killing the Avatar. Zuko shuddered, furious. He gave the boy with the yellow hair who had set the Avatar free a fierce look. He let out a loud war scream and hurled a huge ball of fire toward the blonde. "Aang," Naruto exclaimed as he saw Aang plummet over the side. He was his protector. He ought to have kept him safe, but he hadn't. He faintly heard a buddy of Naruto yell for Aang. Zuko's battle cry was hardly audible to him. He was completely unaware of Sokka's warning call. There was no sound. Once more, he was alone. Naruto was filled with anger and sadness, but he also felt empty. He tightened his hold on the rails. In the chilly water, Aang sensed that he was submerged, but he was powerless to stop it. He was numb and exhausted. "Aang," Naruto yelled at him. As he continued to sink, he thought, "Naruto. He's still up there with that firebender." He heard his Naruto pal shout, "Aang. Nu. Aang." She cried out once more, and Aang became alarmed since he knew his friends were in danger. Aang's tattoos and eyes were glowing white. Returning to the ship, Naruto's whisker lines and eyes were glowing crimson. He turned to the fireball and backhanded it with ease, dissipating it. At Naruto's luminous gaze, Zuko took a step back in terror. Naruto punched out a powerful burst of fire of his own. Despite blocking the flame, Zuko was flung backward by the blast's intensity. Numerous soldiers emerged and encircled Naruto. The soldiers were knocked back when Naruto slammed his hands into the earth, causing the metal plates to rise. The water siblings and Zuko looked on in disbelief. They all wondered, he bent fire and metal. Zuko sprang up and gazed at Naruto in wonder and bewilderment. "But I thought," he began, but before he could finish, there was a splash that made everyone pay attention. Out of the sea came a storm of water. Aang was at the top, gleaming from his tattoos and eyes. As Aang loomed over the ship, Zuko turned to face him in terror. He landed on the deck, bent the water around himself, and then let it loose, sending Zuko over the ship's side and the troops reeling back. Sokka and her buddy Naruto watched in disbelief. "Did you see what they just did?" squeaked the Naruto girl. "Now that was some water bending. And fire bending and what the hell just happened?" Sokka gasped. After using the Avatar and Guardian states, Naruto and Aang passed out. Appa's friend hurried over to Aang as soon as he landed. Naruto was already rising, and he managed to approach them with Sokka's assistance. Aang moaned and turned to face the crowd, as his Naruto friend shook him and asked, "Aang, are you alright?" He added, "Hey Naruto friend, hey Sokka. Thanks for coming," with a weary smile. Sokka grinned. "Well, I couldn't let you guys get all the glory. But we won the fight," Naruto grinned. Then Sokka said, "We still came." Aang turned his gaze to his right. "I dropped my staff." Naruto fell on his face as Sokka volunteered, "I'll get it," and fled. Sokka was startled when another hand grabbed it as he was picking it up. Sokka attempted to remove the hand after realizing it was Zuko's, but the prince refused to let go. Following a brief tug of war, Sokka chose to exact revenge, and gave Zuko the same poke in the head that Zuko had given him previously. Zuko nearly fell into the ocean after losing his hold, but he was able to hold on to the anchor chain. "That's from the water tribe," Sokka exclaimed with a sense of victory. A friend of Naruto had just completed assisting the boys in getting on board Appa when she noticed the soldiers moving in their direction. The guards were a little alarmed as she dragged a stream of water from the deck's puddles. She threw her arms out, trying to replicate what Aang had just done. However, the water behind her froze and flew backwards. "Naruto friend," Sokka yelled at her. Her buddy Naruto saw that she had frozen her brother's feet to the ship when she glanced over her shoulder. Assuming she posed no threat, the soldiers moved on. In the hopes that it would have the same effect, Naruto's friend turned around and did it again. She turned and cheered in her mind. The soldiers stood motionless. Hurry up, Sokka. The Naruto buddy yelled at her brother while climbing on Appa. Sokka was using his boomerang to chip away at the ice surrounding his feet. It's your fault that I'm stuck. I didn't ask for all this flying and magic. I'm just a guy with a boomerang. He grumbled to himself. After freeing himself, he ran up Appa's tail. Yup, exclaimed Sokka. When Iroh saw the enormous creature soar through the air, he had to dab his eyes. Huh? He asked, surveying the deck's mayhem, which included his nephew fighting to return to the ship, the frozen guards, and the unconscious firebenders. Zuko gave the order to shoot them down after he swiftly assisted him in getting back on deck. But it was up to Iroh and Zuko because everyone was unable to do it. They fired a huge ball of fire toward Appa together. After leaping to the rear of the saddle, Aang swung his staff to create a wind arc that redirected the fireball into an ice cliff. The ship was unable to continue after a significant amount of ice fell on it. The children escaped with a triumphant laugh. Zuko scowled at the snow, then at them. Good news for the Fire Lord. The nation's greatest threat is just a little kid. Iroh said. Iroh appeared surprised at Zuko's comment, saying, "You're wrong, uncle. It's not just the Avatar. The Guardian has also shown himself." After hearing what Zuko had to say, Iroh wondered, how did he know that? As they took off, Zuko gazed, and they just did this. I don't know how that's possible, and I don't know if that makes my task easier or harder, but I know I won't underestimate either of them again. Dig this ship out and follow them. He glanced at his passengers. Half of them were frozen, and the other half was using little fires to thaw. He concluded haltingly, as soon as you're finished with that. They were still flying on Appa as the sun began to drop. Now was the moment to raise questions, according to Naruto's pal. She questioned Aang, how did you do that? Aang glanced at her from the side. With the water. It was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. I don't know. I just sort of did it. The friend of Naruto peered down. She wasn't anticipating that response. She said, I don't suppose you have an answer. While glancing at Naruto. When I was little, Mom told me about a guardian state. It's not like Aang's Avatar state, where he builds a connection with the past Avatar, which is the reason why Aang could waterbend. My guardian state makes my power grow and improve my bending abilities, said Naruto. Once more, Naruto's pal glanced at Aang. She noticed that he was averting his gaze when she inquired, why didn't you tell us you were the Avatar? Because I never wanted to be, he replied with a hint of sadness attached. According to Naruto, Aang, the world has been waiting for the Avatar to return. And now we've got a chance to stop the war. Aang turned to face him. And how am I supposed to do that? Inquired he. Looking at Aang, the Naruto friend continued, well, according to legend, you first need to master water, then earth, then fire, right? Well, the monks told me that, Aang remarked. Well, if you go to the North Pole, you can master water bending, a friend of Naruto replied, grinning. We can learn it together, Aang grinned and continued. The friend of Naruto glanced at Sokka. There'll be plenty of firebender heads to knock on the way, she murmured in a melody. Then we're in this together, replied Sokka with a slight smile. I'd like that. I'd really like that. After smiling, Aang took out and unfolded a map. Alright, but before I learn water bending, we have some serious business to attend to, he added. He indicated multiple locations, saying, here, here, and here. What's special there? A buddy of Naruto inquired. Then far over here we'll surf on the backs of big koi fish, Aang said with a bright smile. Here we'll ride the hopping llamas. They turned their gazes to one another, then back to the map, then to Aang, and finally back to one another. Naruto grinned and remarked, it looks like we have a plan. The new day was dawning as the sun climbed above the horizon. Sokka was still soundly asleep in his sleeping pack, while Naruto, Aang, and his companion prepared to depart. While Aang was attaching the bridle on Aang's horns, Naruto was replenishing their water supply, and his friend was loading the sleeping packs behind Appa's saddle. Aang said, grinning broadly, wait till you see it, Naruto friend. The Air Temple is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And turned to face Naruto. A friend of Naruto replied, Aang, I know you're excited, but it's been 100 years since you've been home. Aang smiled and stated, I know that's why I'm so excited, to his pal. Naruto glanced up to Aang and said, Aang, a lot can change in 100 years. Aang answered, yeah, I know, but I have to see for myself, and then he lowered himself to the ground by using air bending. Aang murmured, come on, Sokka. The Air Temple is waiting for us. Sokka moaned, sleep now, temple later. Thinking it was a snake, Aang grabbed his stick and struck Sokka with it. Sokka jumped in his sleeping pack in a panic, but he fell. Ah, get it off. Get it off. While Naruto and his companion were laughing, Aang grinned and said, great, you're awake, let's go. Through Fire Nation port. Zuko had gone to the harbor with his uncle to have his ship repaired. As he and his uncle descended the bowsprit, Zuko gave the order, Uncle, I want the repairs done as fast as possible, because I don't want to risk losing his tail. They heard someone ask, getting in the way of what, Prince Zuko? Iroh said, you mean the Avatar, but he stopped when Zuko turned around and said, don't mention his name on this dock when word comes out that he's alive and the Guardian is with him. Everyone will be hunting them and I don't want anyone getting in the way. They noticed a middle-aged man dressed in official Fire Nation attire when they turned to face him. Captain Zhao Zuko started off, is commander now and General Iroh, great hero of our nation. The Fire Lord's son and brother is welcome guest here. What can I do for you? Zhao responded. Zuko pointed to the ship and said, we're here to get our ship repaired. Glancing at Zuko and Iroh, Zhao questioned, that's quite a bit of damage, what happened? Iroh said, looking at Zuko, who attempted to come up with a lie. You wouldn't believe it. Uncle explained to him what happened, Zuko said to his uncle. Yeah, I'll do that. It was incredible. Did we crash or something? Yes, right into an Earth Kingdom ship, Zuko lied in the hopes that Zhao would take him seriously. Zhao stared directly at Zuko and said, really? Without seeming to believe him. You have to tell me everything, so why don't you join me for a drink? Zhao asked. Zuko turned around, missing Zhao's smug look, and said, sorry, but we don't have time for this. He was about to go when he felt a touch on his shoulder, and heard Iroh say, wait, Prince Zuko, show Commander Zhao your respect. We would be honored to be your guests. Iroh said, do you have some jinsei? It's my favorite, and then he and Commander Zhao left. Zuko was furious and let a small flame escape from his fingers before leaving. Alongside the Avatar crew. On the route to the Southern Air Temple, Naruto, Sokka, and his friend Aang were riding Appa. Sokka didn't think they were truly going through and into the clouds. Aang was seated next to Naruto, while Sokka and his pal were seated in Appa's saddle. Naruto said Aang, who was still grinning, I want to tell you something about the airbenders before we get to the temple. Looking forward to where they were flying, Aang asked, what about them? Naruto replied, nothing, I just want you to be ready for what you're going to see. The Fire Nation is ruthless, they have killed in many lands, and they could have done the same thing to the airbenders. Aang appeared somewhat dejected. While Appa was ascending, Aang smiled again and said, the only way to get to an air temple is on a flying bison, and I doubt the Fire Nation have any flying bison. Just because no one has seen an airbender in a long time doesn't the Fire Nation kill them all. Someone could have escaped, Aang said. They soared up a vertical cliff that was 1,000 feet high. The Southern Air Temple was seen in front of them. Aang grinned and said, there it is, guys, the Southern Air Temple. His pal exclaimed, wow, Aang, that's incredible. They got off of Appa when he made a gentle landing. Aang murmured to Appa, we're home, my friend. We're finally home. In Zhao's tent, Fire Nation port. Zhao was discussing the conflict and the Fire Nation's advancement toward Ba Sing Se, the capital of the Earth Kingdom. A massive outer wall encircled the city, which was then encircled by yet another wall. Zhao stood in front of an intricate globe map that was affixed to the rear wall of the tent. Iroh was admiring the wooden rack of antique spears that covered the left wall of the tent. In the right corner was a pot that was decorated in orange and red. The Fire Nation's emblem was placed in the center of the carpeted floor, which was covered by an elaborate rug in shades of red and black. Zuko was reluctantly seated in one of the two elegant chairs. An iced tea sat on a modest table in front of him. The tent's rich red canvas was held aloft by a lone wooden beam. Ba Sing Se will be under Fire Nation control, and the Fire Lord will finally claim victory in this war, Zhao said, turning to face Zuko's back at the end of the year. Zuko stated bluntly and resentfully, if he believes that everyone will follow him voluntarily, then his are fools. Zhao grinned and took a seat next to Zuko. Zhao sneered and strongly hinted at his meaning when he said, I see that 2 years at sea have done little to temper your tongue. Zuko gripped the armrest of the chair. So Zhao said, then leaned back over the chairs to ask Zuko, how's your search for the Avatar going? Iroh unintentionally knocked over the spears, causing a clattering of metal to interrupt Zhao and Zuko. My fault, entirely, Iroh said, putting his hands in his sleeves and stepping back from the spears that had fallen. This aroused Zhao's interest. How fitting that he was interrupted just as he was asking about the Avatar. We haven't found him yet, Zuko said with a fib, ignoring his uncle's unintentional or deliberate diversion. Did you really expect to? The Avatar died 100 years ago when Sazin attacked the air nomads, Zhao said, straightening his back. He would not, however, pause to coerce Zuko into disclosing anything. Similar to being questioned. The world and the entire Fire Nation haven't found him. What makes you think you will? Zhao sneered. Zhao noticed Zuko's fists tightening on the armrest, as he tried to fight the temptation to lash out. He might have been attempting to avoid shouting it and more saying something significant. In any case, Zhao would keep making fun of him. Unless, he said with a malevolent grin, you have discovered proof that the Avatar is still alive. Zuko made an effort to stay composed and think of a reply. No, Zuko replied, averting his gaze from Zhao's face. As he got back up, Zhao said, Prince Zuko, the Avatar is the only one who could stop the Fire Nation winning this war. If you have any remaining loyalty, you will tell me what you have found. Zhao then gave Zuko a direct look. We found nothing, Zuko said, looking directly into Zhao's eyes. It seems like you mentioned the Avatar passed away a long time ago, Zuko replied, getting up from his chair. He yelled, come on, uncle, we're going. However, the soldiers at the entryway crossed their spears to prevent him and Iroh from leaving before they could. Another soldier came in and walked up to Zhao, clearly attempting to avoid looking at Zuko or his scar, and instead concentrating on the commander. We interrogated the prince's crew as you commanded, the soldier said, bowing before continuing, and they confirmed that Prince Zuko had the Avatar in custody, but allowed him to escape. Zuko felt as though his stomach had deflated. In what way may his staff have betrayed him? As an adolescent who bossed them around and showed them no respect, they viewed him as being as low as a snail. Naturally, they would tell the cruel Commander Zhao. Zhao switched his attention to Zuko, who remained still. Zhao started by saying, "So, Prince Zuko, remind me." He then moved behind Zuko once more and asked, "How did your ship get damaged?" Into his malformed ear. Zuko tightly closed his eyes. His uncle is the only friend or ally he has. By the Temple of Air. Sokka was strolling behind Aang, and Naruto's companion as the Avatar team made their way up the road to the Air Temple. Naruto. Sokka moaned as he held his stomach. "So when do I get something to eat?" Naruto said sharply, "Show some respect, Sokka, as we are the first outsiders to ever visit an Air Temple." "Hey, I'm just a simple man with simple needs," Sokka said, turning to face Aang and his companion Naruto. "So this is an Air Temple. How is it like to live here?" Naruto questioned, glancing over at Aang as he began to explore the area. Aang said, "It was great to live here, Naruto, we had much fun here too." He indicated a space with 2 whiteboards at either end, and numerous posts protruding from the ground, saying, "That's where my friends and I used to play airball." That was the place where the air bison would sleep and Aang moaned as he indicated a building that looked like a hill with numerous holes in it. Looking at Aang, the Naruto friend questioned, "What's wrong?" Aang glanced down with sadness and said, "I can't believe how much things have changed. This place used to be full of monks, lemurs, and bison. Now there is just a bunch of weeds." In an attempt to assist, Sokka glanced at his new acquaintance. "So this airball game. How do you play it?" inquired he. Aang was using airbending to spin a ball in his hands, while Sokka stood atop one of the posts. Sokka gave Aang a weird look as he threw the ball into the air and shrugged. After that, Aang spins, blasting the ball off the posts and down the field. Sokka was finally struck, sending him through the goal. He falls to the ground in a heap. Sokka questioned no one, why does keeping Aang happy have to hurt so much? Upon closer inspection, he saw that the object on the ground was a Fire Nation soldier's helmet. After crawling over to it, he turned to face his sister. To keep Aang from hearing, he muttered, "Naruto friend, look at this." The buddy of Naruto's who was looking down and noticed the helmet murmured softly, "Fire Nation." Naruto replies, "We have to tell him this," after realizing what they were discussing. "Aang, there is something you need to see," shouted the Naruto friend as he turned around. Aang hurried in the direction of Sokka and Naruto's friend. "Okay." He shouted back, hurried over to them, and used airbending to toss the ball into the air and catch it again. After a sorrowful glance at Aang, the Naruto companion turned back to the helmet. She decided. She pulled the snow from the bank onto Sokka and the helmet, using her water bending. "What is it?" inquired Aang eagerly. Naruto's companion grinned and remarked, "Ah, just a new water bending move I learned." As he made his way to the temple, Aang said, "Nice one, but enough practicing, we have a whole temple to see." As he brushed the snow from his face, Sokka remarked sadly, "You can't protect him forever. He needs to know." Sokka and a Naruto friend were chatting as they got closer to the door, and Aang was glancing around. While they were traveling, Naruto said his friend, "Firebenders were here, you can't pretend they weren't." "I can for Aang's sake. If he finds out that the Fire Nation invaded his home he would be defecated," the friend remarked. They noticed that Aang was staring at a statue of a man sitting in a lotus position when they got to the entrance. Without turning around, Aang stated to his friends, "Hey guys, I want you to meet someone." Looking at the statue that Aang was examining, Sokka asked, "Who is that?" As his thoughts strayed to the past, Aang remarked, "This is Monk Jutsu, the greatest airbender ever. He taught me everything I know." I thought of a wonderful event with Jutsu, when they whacked the elders on the heads and threw cakes in the air. With a reassuring tone, the Naruto friend placed a hand on Aang and added, "I'm sure you miss him." "Yo" was all that Aang muttered before heading up the stairs. "Where are you going?" Naruto said, looking up at Aang and asking. Aang turned around and entered the temple after looking back and responding, "There is someone I'm ready to meet at the Air Temple Sanctuary." Aang was followed to a door with strange tubes on it by Naruto, his friend, and Sokka. A friend of Naruto's said, "But Aang, no one could have survived in there for 100 years. It's not impossible that Aang survived in the iceberg for 100, Naruto continued, looking at the door. "Good point," replied Naruto's buddy. Aang looked to his Naruto friend and said, "There might be someone in there who could help me with this avatar thing." Sokka stepped to the door and said, "And whoever is in there could have a delicious meal ready." The door did not budge when he attempted to open it. Sokka said, "I don't suppose you have any keys." As he used airbending to open the door, Aang smiled and said, "The key, Sokka, is airbending." Port of Fire Nation. Zhao's tent. Zuko was seated in the chair once more, with 2 soldiers standing behind him. Zhao was seated in the same chair as Iroh. Standing before Zuko, Zhao listened to his complete confession. The intense light, the sight of the Avatar on the ship, the assault on the town, the battle with the Avatar, and ultimately his escape. All the while, Zhao was grinning. Watching Zuko open up about the Avatar and how he so suddenly lost his only means of transportation was hilarious. Zhao was quite pleased to learn of this. So he said once Zuko had finished his story. A 12-year-old boy and his guardian defeated you and your firebenders? Zhao asked, trying not to chuckle. With little eye contact, Zhao said, Zuko, you're more pathetic than I thought. As coolly as he could, Zuko declared, I underestimated him once, it will not happen again, but his rage was getting the better of him. Zhao said, right, because you won't have a second chance, his arrogant expression disappearing to reveal a superior, upturned nose. Now, let's get serious. Zuko started, Commander Zhao, I have been hunting the Avatar for 2 years now, but Zhao cut him off with a small flame that he held out to emphasize his point, and he almost screamed, and failed. The task of capturing the Avatar is far too important to leave in a teenager's hands, and now that the Guardian has shown himself it's more than important to catch them, he said with a sneer. When Zuko learned that the troops had stopped him from attacking Zhao, he was not happy. Zhao gave the command to keep them here, and turned to go. More tea, please, Iroh shouted joyfully as Zuko kicked the tea table aside when he departed. Within the sanctuary of the air temple, there were hundreds of sculptures inside the area that circled the space and extended hundreds of feet up into the chamber's height. As she gazed about, Naruto's buddy questioned, what is the soul? It's the Avatar circle, they are your past life, Ong. Naruto replied, turning to face Ong, who appeared to be obsessed with the last person in line. Ong? Who is that? A friend of Naruto inquired. Avatar Roku was Ong's straightforward response. The friend from Naruto questioned, how do you know that? There were no plaques or inscriptions. Ong shrugged and said, I don't know. I just do, he answered, keeping his gaze on Roku. Sokka moaned, you just couldn't get any weirder. They heard a noise behind them abruptly. Quick-witted, Sokka ordered the others to hide. In the corridor that leads to the chamber, a shadow emerges. Don't make a sound, firebenders, Sokka said to everyone. It looked like the shadow of a helmet from a burning nation. As the shadow continued to grow, the children became anxious. At last, a lemur with wings emerged from the doorway. Lemur was Ong's first word. Sokka shouted, meet, and dashed in the direction of the lemur. After chasing after the lemur and Sokka, Ong declared, no, I want him to be my friend. Naruto stayed in the Avatar room with his friend. They can't be serious, Naruto groaned, causing his friend to laugh. I'm afraid so, he said. They sprinted till they reached a balcony down a hallway. The lemur simply flew down, but Ong leaped down the balcony and used air bending to land safely. Sokka whimpered and glanced down at Ong, saying, hey, that's not fair. Port of Fire Nation. Zhao's tent. In Zhao's tent, Zuko had been made to wait nervously, his hands squeezing at the pricey wood of the armrest, his teeth clenched in his mouth. Waiting was the worst form of agony. Zhao came back, less arrogant and more formal. As if addressing a rodent, which in his view Zuko was, Zhao declared, my search ship is ready. Once I'm out to sea, my guards will escort you to your ship, and you'll be free to go. He questioned aggressively, why? Are you afraid I'll try to stop you? You stop me, that's impossible, Zhao replied with a smug look as he started to laugh. Iroh rose up after Zuko screamed, don't underestimate me, Zhao. I'll catch Avatar before you. Prince Zuko, that's enough, he murmured, attempting to calm the prince. It doesn't matter, you lost him and I have an entire war fleet under my command, each ship with better equipped men, more soldiers, and more competent men than yours. You're just a banished prince, no home, no allies. Your own father doesn't even want you, Zhao said with a sneer. Zuko wasn't particularly offended by insulting his men, but it did raise the point that, compared to one Fire Navy ship, Zuko had been ill-prepared to chase the Avatar. Zuko was Iroh's warning, since he was aware that the argument was getting too intense for simple teasing. Knowing how pathetic this sounded, Zuko reassured himself, you're wrong, if my father didn't want me back, he wouldn't have given me a chance to return home, and once I deliver the Avatar, he will welcome me home with honor and respect. This defense made Zhao giggle. Zhao continued, his voice now more subdued and acidic, in his eyes you are nothing, than a failure and a disgrace to the Fire Nation. Do you hear yourself? If Fire Lord Azai wanted you back, he would have let you return by now, Avatar or not. With his gaze fixed on Zhao, Zuko growled, that is not true. Zhao continued to gaze at Zuko as he replied, you have the scar to prove it. Zuko, however, had had enough of the taunt. If you think my scar is so amusing, I'll give you one to match, Zuko growled. Zhao's voice was sickeningly calm as he inquired, is that a challenge? Zuko added, an Ikai at sunset. It is a shame your father won't be here to witness your second defeat, Zhao said with a sly smile, after pausing for a while before continuing, your second time to lose in an Ikai. How embarrassing. His gaze shifted to Iroh, and he said, I suppose your uncle will do. Zhao pivoted and walked away. After a few seconds, Iroh finally said, Prince Zuko, have you forgotten the last time you fought a master? Asked Iroh. With his scar hidden in the darkness, Zuko whispered, I'll never forget. Returning to the air temple. The chase had finally come to an end at a one-story building covered with tarp. As he entered the structure and proceeded to another area, Ong exclaimed, "Come on out, lemur, that hungry guy won't bother you." However, he was surprised to see multiple dead Fire Nation warriors. Ong glanced around the room and asked himself, Fire Nation, when did they get here? He stared at a skeleton on the distant wall. No. The skeleton had on the amulet that Jutsu had when Ong first met him, as well as a monk's robe. Sokka entered the room where Ong was and said, "Hey Ong, did you find my dinner?" When Sokka learned that Ong had found Jutsu, he tearfully remarked, "Oh no. Come on Ong, let's get back to Naruto friend and Naruto." Suddenly, however, Ong's eyes and tattoos blaze white. In a process from Roku back to the other avatars, the statue's eyes light up. Naruto said, "Ong. Naruto friend, we have to hurry, come on." As he hurried from the room, ceremonial altars light up in avatar temples around the world, and the custodians realize that the avatar has returned. The response was a little different in the fire temple. The chief keeper gave the command, "Notify the Fire Lord and tell him, the avatar is back." Back inside the structure, with his eyes and tattoos glowing even brighter, Ong was encircled by a spinning ball of air. Ong was tossed back due to the powerful wind, after Sokka's attempt to calm him down failed. "Come on, Ong, snap out of it." Sokka, now cowering behind a shattered wall, was asked by Naruto's companion, what happened. As she and Naruto battled the wind that was tearing across the region, Sokka shouted his response. He learned that firebenders killed Monk Jutsu. Naruto shouted to the others, "I'll do it," and attempted to approach Ong. He went into avatar state. "If he continues this, he will blow us off the mountain. We have to calm him down," Naruto said. The Anakai Arena in Fire Nation Port. Two firebenders engaged in a duel at an Anakai, a fire assembly. On one side of the arena, Zuko was kneeling away from Zhao, while his uncle stood over him with his hands in his sleeves. The iron arena was rectangular, with light brown mud covering the floor. The gong and the guy in red robes holding the mallet to strike it were situated on a small rectangular balcony at Zhao's end. The sun was starting to drop over the horizon, and the sky was a fiery orange and crimson. There was a light wind. Zuko wore black slacks with a scarlet sash as a belt that hung down to his knees and tightened at the legs. He had no shoes and no shirt, demonstrating that he was in excellent health. He had a red-edged black robe draped over his shoulders. With one knee raised up at a 90-degree angle, Zuko was kneeling on one knee, one hand lying on his bent leg, the other in a fist against the floor. He was only able to see his uncle's shoes and the arena's dirt floor, as his head leaned down and his eyes were fixed on the ground. Iroh gave his nephew last-minute advice, saying, "Remember your firebending basics, don't underestimate Zhao." Zuko muttered, "I refuse to let him win," as he got to his feet. Iroh, rather incensed with Zuko's hasty judgments, remarked, "Never do something so rash again." He had to battle Zhao because there was no going back now. Zuko whispered, "Yes, uncle." With a calmer tone, Iroh added, "Good luck." Zhao got up and turned around, saying, "This will be over soon." He spotted Zuko doing the same and dropped into a firebending posture, ready to battle. Years of animosity boiled inside them as they scowled at one another. Zuko's fists curled into flames as they fell slightly. Pulling his arms together, he shot. The blast surged in Zhao's direction, and with a flip of his arm, he batted it away. Zuko fired once more, but this time it was far away and went past Zhao's right. He grinned more broadly. He was too strong for Zuko. Zuko was growing impatient and losing control of his breathing, so he started to advance while occasionally firing at Zhao. Zhao, a bit harder than before, pushed each blow aside. Zuko turned and kicked Zhao, knocking him away with another burst of fire. Iroh yelled at Zuko, "Basic Zuko. Break his root." As guidance. Zuko thought angrily, "Yeah, but I can't use basic moves to break through his root when he knows advanced moves." He needed to know advanced maneuvers because he was unable to keep up with Zhao. Zhao was struck by a fireblade when Zuko kicked him. He squatted down, using firebending to make his hands shine, and negated Zuko's assault. He sent Zuko a streaking burst of fire with an upward motion. He blocked it but was slightly repelled. Zhao opened fire, causing Zuko to retreat farther and farther with each blast. On the offensive, he was stuck. Zuko was knocked off his feet and onto his back by Zhao's strong shot, which was delivered with his arms pressed together, palms up, and fingers curled. When Zuko looked up, he saw Zhao grinning and leaning forward on a leg, his fist aimed directly at Zuko's face. Zuko's gaze expanded. Zhao lost his balance but was not knocked down when Zuko's foot sprang out and twisted beneath Zhao's foot before he could attack him. Zuko grinned and thought, "Now I understand what Uncle meant by breaking his roots." Zhao was knocked onto his back by Zuko's final attempt. Zuko grinned and pointed to Zhao's face with his fist. Zuko stopped, motionless. "Do it," yelled Zhao. Zuko yelled, hit Zhao, and straightened up. Instead of striking Zhao, Zuko punched the side of his head, leaving a burn mark on the floor. Unbelieving that even Zuko hadn't hit him, Zhao yelled, "That's it. Your father raised a coward. I won't hold back the next time you get in my way," Zuko replied in a steady, even voice. With a strange sense of satisfaction that he had refrained from attacking Zhao, Zuko turned around and started to leave. He believed that he would be delighted to have the opportunity to inflict the same kind of harm on Zhao as he had received, to force him to endure what he had, and to comprehend the suffering he had endured after being burned. Now, however, Zuko believed that if he had attacked Zhao, he would be more angry than ever. The fact that he had left their argument there made him feel oddly at ease. Behind him, there was a crackling and burning sound of fire. The scorching sound ceased before Zuko's mind could properly process what was happening, and he realized that his uncle was standing behind him, his palm having grasped Zhao's outstretched foot. Although the Inukai was finished, Zhao had attempted to assault Zuko. Iroh shoved Zhao onto his butt after pushing him back with his foot. He sat up violently and glared at the two. Infuriated by this dirty behavior, Zuko attempted to strike Zhao. Iroh grabbed Zuko by the shoulders and restrained him. He shouted sharply, "No, Zuko. Do not taint your victory." Turning to face Zhao, Iroh said in a harsh tone, "So this is how the great Commander Zhao acts in defeat. Disgraceful. Even in exile, my nephew is more honorable than you." Iroh, who was suddenly friendlier, added, "Thanks again for the tea, it was delicious." Zuko followed him as he turned around and started to leave via the doorway. Zhao watched his two least favorite people go, sitting up with his arm resting against his knee. As he left with his uncle, Zuko said again in a low voice, "Uncle, is what you said true?" "Of course," Iroh remarked politely. "I told you that Jing-Se tea was my favorite," he replied simply, but with a cunning smirk. After hearing what Iroh had to say, Zuko also grinned. Returning to the air temple. In an attempt to console Ong, Naruto's friend shouted, "Ong, I know you're hurt and you think that you have lost everything. But you still have a family. Yes, the monks may be gone, but you still have Sokka, Naruto, and me. We are your family now." The wind started to blow more slowly. Along, the wind vortex subsided. As Ong started to slowly descend to the ground, the bubbles surrounding him became smaller and less visible. Sokka and Naruto approached Ong after he fell to the ground, their friend. The words "we won't let anything happen to you" came out of Sokka's sparkling eyes as he watched Ong. When Naruto's friend took Ong's hand, he noticed that his light had stopped. When Ong stumbled, his friend Naruto grabbed him. "I apologize," Ong whispered feebly. "It's okay, Ong, it wasn't your fault." Naruto grinned and smiled down at Ong. "If the firebenders found this temple, then it means they found the other ones too. I'm really the last airbender. I miss them, and it hurts so much. You won't leave, will you?" Ong asked as Naruto's friend cradled Ong's head. "No, Ong. As long as we can avoid it," replied Naruto's friend, who then gave Ong a hug. "Hey friend, we won't leave you." Sokka smiled and put his hand on Ong's shoulder, saying, "We are just getting to know you. We won't leave you, Ong. We are your family now." Naruto also smiled. "Everything's packed, we're ready to go," Sokka said as he and Naruto approached Ong and Naruto's friend, who were standing in front of Avatar Roku in the Avatar room a few minutes later. Naruto turned to face Roku and remarked, "I buried Jutsu and the other monks I found. How's he going to help me?" Ong asked, "If I can't speak to him," as he kept his eyes on Roku. "I don't know, Ong, but what I do know is that you will find a way," replied Naruto, placing his hand on Ong's shoulder. As they turned to go, they noticed the lemur that Sokka and Ong had attempted to capture standing in the doorway, holding some fruits in his arms, which he placed in front of Sokka, who started eating them joyfully. "Looks like you made a new friend, Sokka." Naruto's companion grinned as she watched Sokka eat, saying, "Can't talk, must eat." Sokka replied, still eating, and the lemur approached Ong, sitting on his head. "Hey little guy," Ong said. Beyond the air temple. To pay their final respects to Monk Jutsu, Ong and his comrades stood by his grave. "Come on, Ong, let's go," Naruto said to Ong, placing his hand on his shoulder and said, "Just give me a second." When Ong noticed that Naruto nodded, he approached Sokka and his friend. Ong knelt down and placed Jutsu's jewelry on his grave after Naruto had left. "I thank you for everything you ever did for me. You were like a father to me," Ong said, recalling their time together in the air temple. Rewind. Ong sat on the yellow kitchen railing with one leg over the railing and a knee raised to his chest, his chin resting on the knee, and a sad, bored expression on his face, as he hardly looked at the elderly guy behind her. As a representation of the air nomads, Monk Jutsu was an elderly guy with a long white mustache that reached his chin. He had arrow tattoos on the back of his hands and head, one of which was visible on his bald head, and extended past the nape of his neck. He had a circular wooden pendant with the airbending symbol on it, a wooden bead necklace with red tassels near the bottom, and big gray eyes with lines to the sides of his mouth. He was taking one of the fruit pies out of the oven with a long wooden spatula tool. "But," said Monk Jutsu in a calm, fatherly voice, "the true secret lies in the gooey center." He smiled as he explained. He placed the fruit pies on the railing close to Ong, and they were shaped like stacked cakes, with only one golden brown layer and a different twirling whip on top. "But you're thinking about more than just the well-known fruit pie secret, aren't you?" Monk Jutsu inquired after observing his vacuous, lifeless face. Ong turned to face him and lied, "Ha, no, not at all." Monk Jutsu smiled and raised an eyebrow. "Okay, yes," he said, swinging his legs over the railing and standing in front of Monk Jutsu. Uncertain of where to begin, he said, "It's just that." Maybe the monks made a mistake, me being the avatar. There's nothing special about me, he shouted in frustration, his arms outstretched and his gaze fixed on the floor. No one. There are many unique qualities about you. Monk Jutsu said, his tone and expression suddenly grave and suspicious. The only mistake I and the other monk elders made was telling you about being the avatar before you turned 16, he said. Ong gazed at the garden and said, but Jutsu, how will I know if I'm ready for this? All of your questions will be answered when you're old enough to enter the Air Temple Sanctuary. You'll find someone inside who will help you with your joinery, Jutsu replied, glancing at some flying bison. Ong let out a sigh and turned his head away to gaze at the gardens, where lemurs and flying bison flew, some of them consuming the plants. Jutsu's expression brightened once more as he asked, now, young airbender, will you assist me with these cakes or not? At Jutsu's remarks, Ong's dejected expression brightened, and he turned back to him with a gentle smile. With their hands and legs held together, Jutsu and Ong stood at the ready, well forward of the railing, with their heads turned to the railing in pies, breathing in and letting out a sigh. Taking steps in a curve, they continuously turned one hand over the other, the air bowling in their palms, and then, using an uppercut motion, they struck the pies on the sill with some air, propelling them through the air. The pies fell on their heads, covered in yellow cake and fruit filling, and soared over the other four monk elders, who were sitting cross-legged on a yellow stone platform between two bonsai trees in the garden. Jutsu and Ong were leaning over the railing, laughing, Jutsu more loudly and merrily than Ong, while flying lemurs swarmed, started to pick off the food, and ate while the monk elders stayed still. Ong was still plagued by the fear of being the avatar, and Jutsu, despite his advanced age, laughed aloud. Jutsu turned to Ong and said, see, young one, your aim has greatly improved. To become the best, you don't have to be born the best, he said, grinning at Ong. Ong grinned and bowed to monk Jutsu. Thank you, he said, maintaining his respectful demeanor. You're welcome, my young pupil, he answered, grinning and returning the bow. Flashback end. I will make you proud, old man, Ong replied as he got back up and approached the others who were packing some food. Ong held the lemur on his arm and said, hey guys, I want you to meet the newest member of the family. What are you going to call it? As she glanced at Ong, Naruto's companion inquired. He was about to eat an apple, but the lemur was quicker and stole it from him. Ong replied with a smile, I'll call him Momo. When they saw Naruto's look, they all started laughing with Sokka and his companion. Naruto began, we have a problem, guys, and noticed that they were paying attention. The eyes of the previous avatars started to glow when Ong entered the avatar state, and so did they in all other temples. That means the Fire Nation is now after us, Naruto said to his Sama-looking buddies. Sokka continued, you're right, Naruto, we'll need to be more careful now, and they nodded in accord. When it was time to leave, Naruto replaced Ong on Appa's head, and Ong was now seated on Appa's saddle with his friend and Sokka, looking over his former home one final time before the sky covered everything.